Brotherhood for inviting me to participate in this program and to address you all who have been gathered here today, and especially to the students, the scholar recipients. So congratulations to you all. It's wonderful to hear some of your biographies. I know there are more coming. You're poised to do a lot of wonderful things, I have no doubt. What I wanted to do today is share a little bit of the background and the history of sort of how did we wind up where we are today. What is the foundation and the underpinnings of this ceremony, and how did it come about that the Sephardic Brotherhood would decide to offer scholarships to its students? And it has a much more fascinating, multifaceted, and challenging, actually, history than you might initially expect. And so I titled my presentation today, From the Fez to the Mortarboard. You know what the mortarboard is? That's the hat you wear when you graduate. And the origins and impact of the Sephardic Brotherhood scholarships. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how actually that change in the sartorial marker, the change in the hat, becomes a major change in culture, status, aspirations, and future possibilities for Sephardic immigrants and their descendants in the United States. As Martin mentioned, my family has been long involved in the Sephardic Brotherhood, and this is a photograph of my great-grandfather, who was the Chacham, who was the rabbi, in Naar in Salonica, and subsequently in Harlem, and then in New Jersey. Now remember, I grew up in New Jersey, and I didn't have so many other friends that had a photograph like this of an ancestor wearing a fez, hanging on the wall. Anybody else have a photograph of a family member wearing a fez or something like that? A few of them, okay. So this was the style of clothing that men wore in the Ottoman Empire, like back in the 19th century. I don't know how much you think about fezes these days, but in the 19th century, the fez was introduced actually as a symbol of modernity. It was a sign of one's status as a citizen and a member of the Ottoman polity, of the Ottoman community. You were Jewish, you were Muslim, you were Christian. You could wear the fez as a man, and you could say, we are part of this shared community that cuts across religion, language, and culture. Now, coming to the United States, the fez, and coming from the Ottoman Empire, coming from the predominantly Muslim world, became associated with deleterious characteristics, became a stigma, something that the new immigrants sought to overcome and discard in order to make a way for themselves and their new lives in the United States. And here I just have this is a Ladino advertisement for the congregation of the Brotherhood. You can see here, Keynote Sephardic Israel de la Hermandad Sephardic de America, 1720 Madison Avenue, which this is an advertisement for Yamin Noraim, for the high holidays, and they're being conducted by los bien conocidos Chazanim, Chacham Revi, Benjamin Naar is listed first, so he was the rabbi who was conducting the services there. And this is actually, anybody received the Brother, the Sephardic the publication? Yeah, something. So this was published in the 1920s version of that back in the day. And back in the day, going to university was not something that could be taken for granted by any stretch of the imagination. If you were a Sephardic immigrant, or even if you were a child of Sephardic immigrants, if you wound up at the university, that was newsworthy. You were getting your picture in the newspaper, because it was very uncommon for the first generation of Sephardim who came to the United States to go to the university. It was not even common for that first generation of American-born Sephardim to go to the university. And so I want you to understand a little bit about that history so that we don't take for granted what our trajectories are today and the possibilities here. And you can see a couple of examples of this. The guy in the press in Lavara on the left here, Salvador Menashe, who's from Rose, and Simon Nissim. We're going to talk a little bit more about him in a moment. And this is actually what he used. Even many, many years after he graduated from law school, he used this as his photograph, because he was so proud of having gone to university, been one of the first members of the Sephardic community to do so. Why was going to university so important for the Sephardim 100 years ago? One of the main reasons was that broader American society And the broader Jewish community, the Ashkenazi Jewish community, didn't think that Sephardim were bright enough to go to the university. And I'm not kidding. I'm really not kidding. Our people were perceived as strange and peculiar. How can it be that you speak a Spanish-based language, that you write in Hebrew letters, but you come from the Muslim world, and you don't speak Yiddish? Could you possibly be Jewish? And how about the Spanish language that you speak? Why does it intermix? Not only Spanish, but also Greek and Hebrew and Turkish and Arabic and French and all these other different kinds of cultures. So here you can see an expose in a newspaper from over 100 years ago. This is quite a claim. Ladino America's strangest language. So this was not a welcoming environment for the Sephardim when they came. This was alienating. In the world from which our forebears came from, speaking Ladino was completely normal. It's what you did. There was really no other choice. But coming to America, where the categories of identity were different, where the category of Jewish was already taken by people who were not us, that category was taken by principally Yiddish-speaking Jews who came from Eastern Europe. The Sephardim found themselves on the outside, not only the outside of general American society, but perhaps even more so on the outside of Jewish American society. And you can hear, the unusual tongue spoken by a hitherto undiscovered group of Jews from Turkey, Greece, Palestine, and Arabia, whose ancestors left Spain thousands of years ago, only 10,000 here, who have arrived in the last 4 years, striking insight into their life. And so this is like a yellow journalism expose that reveals all of the crude and rude claims about the backwards Sephardim, how they're uncultured and they're uncivilized, and you can't read, and you can't write, how will they make it in America? How the women look strange, and they cook funny foods that are not Jewish, and they don't even cook with butter, they cook with this strange oil that they make out of olives. And this was not just a one or two kind of elements of representation of the Sephardim in America. The Jewish Federation, which was the main Jewish organization in New York, commissioned a report about the Sephardim in the United States. And this report claimed to detail all of the problems of the Sephardim in the United States. By which I mean they made up stuff, just literally made up stuff about the Sephardim, claiming that Sephardim were not educated, that they couldn't read or write, and that nobody had ever gone to university. Which was not true by any stretch of the imagination. By this time in the 1920s, there were already Sephardim who had gone or were attending Columbia University, New York University, Brooklyn College, Washington University in St. Louis, University of Washington in Seattle, Berkeley, etc., etc. So you get the idea, there were a few there. And look at how the Forward, which was the main Jewish newspaper in New York that catered to Ashkenazi Jews, how they represented the Sephardic people in the United States. Talk about a welcome here. In the old country, they, Sephardic Jews, had no cultural life of their own worth speaking of. They had no common body of customs and traditions. This is a Jewish publication writing this about our people. They had no common body of customs and traditions, no common literature, no knowledge or curiosity about the past. They had been a backward people in a backward country, and how could they hope to progress in this country? The result of this report was devastating for the Sephardim, because one of the Sephardic organizations at the time actually wound up applying to become a member of the Jewish Federation affiliated association, and their application was denied. So they were literally excluded from the organized Jewish community, and that was even compounded at the university context. Columbia University was the first university in the United States who had a professor of Jewish studies, a very famous professor named Salonica. And he was very well known, and it was an endowed professorship, and there was some up-and-coming young Sephardim who were attending Columbia at that time, one of whom had already graduated. They were interested in exploring their own heritage as part of their studies. Salonica was not interested in including the Sephardim in the curriculum. And so the Sephardim did not give up in their determination to try to have their history and culture represented. Instead, what did they do? They found a partner in the Spanish department. And the chair of the Spanish department, unlike the head of the Jewish Studies program, the Jewish Studies guy said, the Jews of the Ottoman Empire, the Sephardic Jews, Ladino, that's not relevant to Jewish history. Actually, if we talk about that, it may be a liability, in fact, because people might associate us with the Middle East. They might associate us with Africa. They might associate us with Asia. This is an era of very intense overt racism, as you can see. But the dynamics in the Spanish department and the Hispanic Institute were very different. Because there, the head of the Spanish Institute, the Hispanic Institute, was a Spanish guy, and he actually had a very different attitude. He said, you cannot understand Spanish culture or Spanish history if you don't understand the Sephardim. The Sephardim speak a beautiful Ladino language that preserves elements from medieval Spain, from Cervantes, and they are part of our history and they are part of our culture. So it's really fascinating to think about these different engagements, different representations. A very negative approach on the part of the Jewish community and Jewish studies, and an element of embracing on the part of Spanish studies. And so the first Sephardic Studies program in the history of American academia is established at Columbia University in 1934, not as part of Jewish studies, but actually as part of Hispanic studies. And there are a few dozen young Sephardim. I mentioned the main figures here, Mayor Jose Bernardete, who was a professor at Brooklyn College of Spanish, and Henry Besso, who was a member of the Brotherhood, and was also, he worked for the adult education program for the city of New York, and he was in charge of the Romance Languages Department. They established the Sephardic Studies Program, and they put on periodic lectures, they had conferences, they orchestrated very elaborate theater productions in Ladino. And in 1935, the 800th anniversary of Maimonides, they put on a big program to celebrate Maimonides. And there was an effort there to collaborate between the Sephardic community and the Sephardic intellectuals and the Jewish Studies Scholars at Columbia University. There were a lot of tensions that played out there because the Sephardim said, well, Maimonides, he's a great medieval Spanish philosopher, he's ours. We should have the right to speak about who he is and what he represents. And the Jewish Studies professor says, no, you don't. We're going to be in control of the narrative of Jewish history. And what results from this is a sense that the Sephardim were being snubbed once again. And what does it do? Is it transforms the place of Sephardic studies, and it moves it increasingly outside of the university setting as a result of this experience of alienation. Where does it go? It goes back into the community. And it is at the initiative of this guy, Henry Besso, who was a member of the Hermandad. And in about 1934, as all of this is happening, he realizes that the Fondo Secreto, which is the fund for the needy that the Brotherhood still operates, it's named after the Pariah family. They gave, in 1934, they made the unprecedented decision to give to, not only to the poor members of the community, this was a working class community at this time, and they decided to give to the community a youngster who couldn't afford textbooks for school. So they gave him $5. And Henry Besso had the idea, he said, okay, we're going to expand the framework of our funding opportunities. We should establish an initiative to get more Sephardim at the university and to get more Sephardim active in understanding the meaning of our history and our culture, to be defenders of our culture, to change the opinion and the perception of what the mainstream Jewish institutions and publications were saying about us. We need to defend ourselves, and we will defend ourselves in the university context. So what winds up happening is they make a partnership with the Brotherhood, and they create not only this fund for the needy, they create an education committee. The education committee now starts hosting some some of these lectures, and one of the most important lectures they have is they bring the head of the Spanish Studies Department from Columbia, and he addresses the members of the Sephardic Brotherhood. Okay? You can see there on the right the constitution of the Sephardic Brotherhood. Now, out of this initial interest and dynamic new involvement, the Scholarship Committee and the Scholarship Fund that we are honoring today is born. The first Scholarship Fund award recipients received their awards in 1938. And here you can see the chairman. The chairman was Simon Nissim, that university educated guy that I mentioned earlier, who was a very important member of the Sephardic Brotherhood. And you can see some of the other members of the chairman of the committee: Irving Atias, Joseph Catan, Marios Pilo or Pilo, Albert Matarasso, and Ain Najari. And you can see La Vara, which was the main Ladino newspaper of the time, covered it in detail in Ladino, and they started a new English section a few years earlier to try to bring the more Americanized members of the community into an understanding of their history and their culture. And you can see how the article begins in English. Look, for the first time in the history of Sephardic life in the city, being New York, a scholarship fund has been established with a view to assisting our youth financially in their pursuit of higher education. The Sephardic Brotherhood takes the initiative again in adding another ramification to its manifold activities. And what does it mean? They were doing something again. The Brotherhood at that time had the distinction that separated out from a lot of the other mutual aid societies catering to Sephardic Jews at the time, of not only providing benefits for people when they died or when they were sick, but trying to do things for people when they were alive. And they saw that this was an extension of that enterprise. In the Ladino section of the paper the following week, they review all of the things that transpired at the awards program. It was a packed, the first 2 years of the Sephardic Brotherhood awards ceremony were major enterprises, like Irving Barokas was his favorite day. This was a major day for the Brotherhood. Anybody want to guess how many people showed up to see 5 people get $100? 600 people. Wow. 600 people would show up. They'd have music. They'd have a lecture by a scholar or by a prominent figure in the community, and they would celebrate the amazing accomplishments. It was so amazing precisely because everybody thought it wasn't possible, that the Sephardim could not elevate themselves. They were backwards people from backwards countries. They were here to prove them wrong. And here you can see the first award winners: Aaron Pardo, Isaac Alhadeff, Rachel Sion, Stella Bahar, Isidore Torres. Maybe some of these surnames are familiar to you. And as Lavara reported, the purpose of all this is traer honor a sus parientes, a la hermandad y al judío sephardi. To bring honor, the scholars are to bring honor to their parents, to the Brotherhood, and to the Sephardic Jew. And I hope that's what you all will be doing as well. But I hope your scholarships are more than this. Maybe they're extra zero. But maybe not. Now,
$100 was worth a lot more.
No, that's true. That's true. $60 was not.
Like
that was
$1,000 today.
That's right. They were very generous. And the original donations just came from everyday members. They could give $1, $2, or $5. And if you were $5, you were in the patron level. And it's through this way that they collected the money that they shared. Now, the first scholarship was named in honor of Nissim Bahar. Somebody has this scholarship, I think. Yeah. So you should be aware. I mean, there is a story, Joe Halio was alluding to this earlier. There are marvelous stories and histories about all of the names that appear in your scholarships. They are names of people with histories that are fascinating and very important. So I encourage all of you scholars who have received the awards, look into it, inquire. Who are the people who have given you the funds to support your education? This one, Nissim Bahar, he didn't give the money. They raised the money and they put his name to the money because guy was considered the father of the Sephardic community of New York. And he was very unusual because unlike almost all the other Sephardim at the time, who made up the membership of the Brotherhood and the broader colony or the community, he was not from what is now Greece or Turkey. He was actually from Ottoman Palestine. He was from Eretz Israel, and he was a representative of the Alliance Israélite Universelle, which was a French Jewish school. And he was also a major figure in the Hebrew revival movement. Some of you have heard of Eliezer Ben Yehuda, who revived and made Hebrew a modern language. Well, this guy was doing it even before Eliezer Ben Yehuda. Okay? And in the United States, he was also a defender of the Sephardim. He encouraged them to learn English, to Americanize to an extent so that they could survive in the American society. And he did all of that in his free time. Actually, what he did professionally was he was the founder and the director of the National Liberal Immigration League. As you may know, in the beginning of the 20th century, there was a very harsh and strong nativist sentiment in this country that resulted in immigration restriction laws incorporated into the American government. The purpose of those immigration restriction laws were to bar and exclude immigrants who were not considered really white. So what did that mean? It meant barring and limiting people coming from Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. The principal targets were Jews. That's part of our history in this country. And so Nassim Bahar was organizing to counter the immigration restriction activities that was taking place in the United States. That was his situation, and that was one of the reasons that brought a lot of people to support him and to see him as a leader of the community and as a contributor to the broader civic life of American society. So he was deeply involved in his community, and he was deeply passionate about education in 3 languages, and 4 actually, and he was deeply passionate about the broader society. Now, as these annual awards developed, what they tried to do was not only encourage the youngsters who were getting the awards to follow whatever path that they wanted, but they wanted to try to encourage them in these early years, in the 30s and 40s, to really delve into the field of Sephardic studies and to try to take over some of the work that had been done at Columbia University. And so one of the first things that they did was they introduced an essay competition about Sephardic life. So not just saying why you're a student, why you're a scholar, but they picked different topics, and I don't know how long it lasted, not very long as far as I can tell. But the first one was to write an essay about the great medieval Spanish poet and philosopher, Isaac Alhadeff. And the guy who won that award, for which he got $15 for the essay prize, was this guy, Irving Crespi. I looked him up. We have a Crespi among the awards. I don't know if they're related exactly. But I found his obituary in the New York Times from about 20 years ago. He was a major figure in polling of public opinion research. He went on and became an important figure of American society. So that was very interesting. And in 1942, they had a very interesting keynote speaker at the time. So normally they would have the people associated with the Columbia Sephardic Studies Program be the speakers. They'd have Ben E, who was the professor. They'd have Henry Besso. There's a Besso scholarship here. They would speak about aspects of Sephardic history and culture and try to inspire a sense of pride in the Sephardic, in the young. In 1942, they invited a famous guy who was part of the Sephardic community, although was not deeply connected to that community. And that was a guy by the name of Maurice Abravanel. Maurice Abravanel was born in the Ottoman Empire in the city of Salonica, and he was a musical virtuoso. He wound up studying in Lausanne, in Switzerland, and he was recruited by the New York Metropolitan Opera to be the conductor in 1936. And he was then and remains the youngest person to ever serve as the conductor of the New York Metropolitan Opera. So the Brotherhood invited him to address the scholars in 1942. You can imagine, the war is going on. They don't know what is going on in the old country. They don't realize yet that their families, especially those from Salonica and other parts of Greece and the Balkans, are about to be wiped out of the face of the earth. And here they are listening to a classical music conductor of Sephardic background speak to them about his memories of Salonica, of his education, about American culture, about the importance of the humanities and arts, about the power of music to change the world, and they were accompanied by musical performances. Remember, over 600 people showed up to this. So it was a real major event. The whole community came together. There were plenty of things that divided this community. There were the socialists and there were the Zionists, and they were at loggerheads. Remember, this was a workers' organization. But they came together in support of scholarship in general and Sephardic scholarship in particular. And so my message for you, scholars and families, is to think about this history a little bit, to think where we have come in the last 80 or so years, to recognize the strides that have been accomplished by the members of this organization and by Sephardic in general, and also to recognize the sacrifices that had to be made, of which there were many. The language, for example, had to go. It was a backwards language and backwards people. Many aspects of the cultural heritage had to go in the service of Americanization, in the service of entering the American mainstream. And so the question is, for you young people especially, what's the future of your lives going to involve as it relates to your Sephardic identity? Take a peek at who the names are who have bestowed the funds for you, and you'll learn something interesting. The Mayorkas Scholarship, for example. Anybody know who this guy is on the right, by the way? Secretary of Homeland Security. Alejandro Mayorkas, his great and uncle, provided the David and Rebecca Mayorkas Memorial Fellowship Scholarship. That's just one example. They were a part of one of the earliest Sephardic families that came to the United States. They came in the 1890s, and they sold Oriental rugs at the Chicago's World Fair. And then they settled in New York, and they provided rugs to decorate for Hanukkah parties and for other kinds of things. By the way, Rebecca Mayorkas was the organizer of a French language socialist club. So they're very interesting, but they were very wealthy, very interesting people, and here you can see. And if you go through all the names, you'll have fascinating stories. I was just talking to Mr. Shimshi over there, and the Shimshi, David Shimshi, was very involved in the Brotherhood as well. And he and my great-grandparents, they knew each other. He was very involved in organizing, not only for the Brotherhood, but charitable contributions for the Jews of Salonica and to support their well-being in the lead-up to and during the war. And each and every one of the families whose names you have as part of your fellowship, they have a story to tell, and I hope that you will excavate those stories. Now, what does it mean to be a young Jewish person in the United States today? What does it mean to be a Sephardic person in the United States today? It means when you are operating in a Jewish world, you have to think, how is the Jewish world talking about Jewishness? Is our culture and our history represented in that presentation of Jewishness? Are they using pronunciations? Are they saying Torah? Or are they saying Torah? Are they saying Yashikov? Are they saying Chazak Baruch? These are little tiny things, but be on the lookout. Can you become a defender and promoter of Sephardic culture? When they talk about Jewish foods, are they talking about, what are they talking about? Are they talking about lots of bagels and knishes? Or are they talking about other food that is just as Jewish for the Sephardim? Are they talking about borekas? Are borekas Jewish food? They are Jewish foods. They are Jewish foods prepared by Jews for Jews. Right? What is the history that you are being told when you learn about Jews coming to America? Is it about the Lower East Side? Sure. But where is the history of the Ladino theater in the history of the Jews of the Lower East Side? Where is the history of the Hermandad in the history of Jews in New York? Where is the history of the Ladino press in the history of the Jewish press? You get the idea what I'm saying. So have that as part of your consciousness. Be there to promote where you come from and who you are. Get educated about those aspects of your past and your heritage, and be ready to share it with the world. We are not, as our opponents once said, a backwards people from a backwards country. we have a rich culture coming from a rich part of the world, and if we understand where we come from, we can paint a path forward, and we can enrich not only American society, but also American Jewish society now and into the future. Thank you for the opportunity.
I learned a lot. I want to thank Dr. Naar again for this lovely presentation. By the way, a thought came to my mind. Of those students in the audience here that have strong Sephardic names, have you ever been questioned by anybody about your last name? And anybody ever asked you, where did that come from? So that's an interesting thing about us as Sephardic Jews. We have a very rich culture. To say today that you're Sephardic encompasses a bigger umbrella, but we are talking now specifically about we as Sephardic Jews, Ladino-speaking Sephardic Jews from Greece and Turkey.